Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for this week's Tariff and Trade Update webinar. My name is Michelle Conley, and I'm the Senior Director of Partnerships at World Trade Center Utah. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. As a reminder, these webinars are recorded, and they are also posted on our YouTube channel. We've been doing this weekly for months, so if you want to go check back on other updates, please feel free to do that, or you can share today's webinar with other folks as well. We also invite you to use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout. This week, we are fortunate to have the brilliant Troy Keller joining us, partner at Dorsey Whitney, and also our policy advisor here at World Trade Center Utah, to provide an update on trade policy, tariff policy that's happened over the past week. And we also have Wayne Coleman, expert in all things foreign trade zone and supply chains, here to give an update on what's been going on with the foreign trade zone here in Utah, and help everyone know how to get connected with that. We also have a really great event coming up on Tuesday evening at Stadler Rail, focused on the foreign trade zone and tariffs, that I hope you can join us for. And I'll share a little bit more about that at the end of the webinar. But for now, I'll let Troy take over and share some updates. What's been going on this week in tariffs, Troy?
Thanks, Michelle. Actually, it's been another spicy week, I guess, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective. And I will say that the updates we'll talk about today, most of these are, as always, on the World Trade Center tariff dashboard. I think Rayanne's going to put a link to that in the chat, and feel free to click on that and look at it as we're talking or afterwards. But I do hope that folks visit that regularly, like I do. It's a great resource. Another thing that I wanted to mention about that dashboard that is something that we haven't talked about a lot, but I think people should remember that it's there, and it is something that most businesses should sort of check on once in a while. It's funny, the things, a lot of things we'll talk about today, or you probably read about anyway, they're in the news, but a couple things aren't, because they don't seem like big headline issues for the general population. But if you're in a sector that's impacted, it's very much a headline for you. So one of those things, if you look towards the top of the dashboard, there's a few links, and one of those goes to the ITA website, where they describe the anti-dumping countervailing duty case.
I think we've lost Troy. There he is.
Sorry about that, everybody. Well, I don't know where I cut out, but basically,
You were talking about the links at the top of the
Right when you were going to tell everybody how to avoid all the tariffs, you cut out.
Well, we'll have to wait for next week then on that one. I can't say it twice. Anyway, there's a link that takes you to a list of the anti-dumping cases that are ongoing at the federal government, and those are very important for companies to be aware of. We've had cases in the past where Utah businesses have been really devastated because competitors or peers launched a case with Commerce and USTR, and went through that process, which led to basically significant tariffs on imports that they were relying on for components and manufacturing components. So you should, I think, monitor those too if you're depending on the sector you're in, but especially if you're in the manufacturing sector, because there could be components that might be hit by an anti-dumping case, and there's lots of opportunities to comment and to be involved in those. So if you see that, make sure you're aware of that. A couple more general ones you probably have seen headlines on. So there's the secondary tariff, I think, threat, we can safely call it, that President Trump has announced, and that relates to, of course, the Russia's war against Ukraine. And the idea there is that if any country is doing trade with Russia, then that country will face 100% tariffs in the U.S. The details on that have not been, do those stack? Probably, maybe not. There's a lot of detail that hasn't been provided. Those are, I think, 50 days off, so kind of call it September 1 is when those would kick in. I guarantee there'll be a lot of interplay between now and then and what those might look like. The countries that, as you might have read, that would be most impacted by those would be China, or really, our trade with China, India, maybe a few others. Also, some updates on our closer trading parties, partners, meaning Canada and Mexico. You might have seen over several days ago, Trump sent some letters to each of those countries and the EU, again saying, look, we haven't really made any progress in discussions. I'm worried about, for Canada and Mexico, worried about the fentanyl crisis. For the EU, we're just worried about the lack of progress on deal making. So 30% starting on August 1 on all imports from the EU, and Mexico 35% from Canada. And in each of those, well, especially on the US, on the Canada and the Mexico ones, we don't think those would impact USMCA imports. That's been, the White House has kind of messaged that, but then they've said, but we haven't made a final decision on that. So that's something to appreciate and note, that if to the extent those do get implemented here in just a week and a half, then those would, we believe those will only apply to non-USMCA content product. So there's that. The EU one that doesn't mean they're not scared. They are very scared. The EU one, I think, is particularly worrisome. It's unclear how a deal gets cut in the next few days with the EU, given the somewhat lack of progress there. But in any event, like we've all become aware of in the last couple of months, it's a fluid situation, and that's certainly the case with the announcements this week. Another one, there's been some other things you'll see on the dashboard, some clarifying guidance on the vehicles that come, the tariffs on the vehicles that come in, and how you apportion those between the U.S. and then the foreign content. So another one I wanted to touch base on for a minute here is another one you probably haven't seen in the headlines. USTR launched a 301 investigation on Brazil, and this is potentially, again, very interesting or useful or scary for individual companies, depending on how they fit, what the relationship is with Brazil, or with other countries that where they might export into, and Brazil does too. You might have, Brazil might be a competitor of yours, some Brazilian companies in other countries where you export into. So it can impact you in multiple ways. But this investigation, remember, this was done in Trump 1. This is, Section 301 is what was used for the tariffs that were ultimately levied on Chinese imports. And this is not as instant as like IEPA, which is the basis for the letters that have been going out. This is more of a process. And so USTR launches a 301 investigation. It typically takes some time to work through. And in this case, they've given people who'd like to comment on that until August 18, and then they'll have a hearing on September 1. Then they'll make some decisions within a month or two after that. And so the issues that they listed, and it's good to sort of focus on these. They listed kind of a list of bullet points that, this again is from the USTR. So digital trade, electronic payments, they commented how Brazil has been undermining the competitiveness of US companies in those sectors. They mentioned intellectual property protection that is lacking in Brazil. They mentioned ethanol. I know we're not a massive, kind of corn producing state, but nonetheless that can be impactful. How Brazil has been sort of USTR's, said they've been sort of unfair in the treatment of duties and taxes on biofuels. And then illegal deforestation, so another ag impacting activity where Brazil has been, through deforestation, been able to expand its ability to grow ag products at kind of a less costly manner, kind of competitively challenging manner for U.S. ag producers, and of course for timber as well. And so that is that's not the full list, but I think those are the ones I thought were worth calling out for this crowd. And so if any of those, or if you have other issues with Brazil, or Brazil is an important trading partner for you, and you're worried about this resulting in higher tariffs for your business or otherwise impacting your business, and so you can be on either side of it, then this is one to look at, to monitor. You can comment if you'd like, or you might want to watch and monitor the comments as they come in. We can provide a link to that process. But basically, one I wanted just to touch on, because I know some companies will be quite interested in that, and others it won't really be super impactful. So I think that is probably, there have been a few more things like the 10% tariff that'll be applied on, I think a lot of the smaller countries. But I think those are probably the high points for this week. And again, there's more detail on the World Trade Center dashboard. So with that, Wayne, I'm going to pass it over to you to talk about foreign trade zones, which I'm super excited to hear the latest on.
Thank you, Troy. That was a great summation of what's going on with 301. I appreciate that. My name is Wayne Coleman. I administer the Foreign Trade Zone at WTC Utah, which is FTZ 30. We cover basically anybody that is 60 miles or 90 minutes drive time from the Salt Lake City Airport. That is where CBP is headquartered. So that encompasses probably, I would say, 85 to 95% of the businesses that would be eligible to participate in the program. I'll do a little bit of a high level description of what a foreign trade zone is, and then talk about what the benefits are. And Troy brought up a few things that FTZs can actually help with, and I'll get into that as well. So the U.S. Foreign Trade Zone program was started in 1934. It's an area that's considered outside the commerce of the United States for customs purposes only. So right now, when you import something, if you're an importer, and your shipment arrives at a port anywhere in the United States, before it can legally travel into the country, it has to be entered. And so you file an entry which domesticates the shipment, meaning it becomes now able to travel as something that's domestically in the United States and there legally. With a foreign trade zone, your shipment would arrive at the port and you would not file an entry. You would bypass that process, which is sometimes specifically at a port, let's say like LA, Long Beach, or even Oakland, where a lot of our stuff comes in. It speeds up, expedites that process. So you don't have to wait in that long queue to get through the entry process, and you can make your train that heads east on time. So the container bypasses the entry process, ships to your facility, which has been designated as a foreign trade zone. And I'll get into a little bit of that as well, as how that can happen. So that container arrives at the foreign trade zone, and instead of an entry, you do an admission. You admit that material, those goods, those parts, finished products into the foreign trade zone. They can stay in there indefinitely. There's no time limit for you having to remove them. You can materially transform them, use them in manufacturing, and take these parts at one tariff number and turn them into another part with a different tariff number, which can result in a lower or no duty situation when it eventually leaves the foreign trade zone. Or you can export your product from the foreign trade zone. It having never entered the U.S., never triggers a dutiable event, which an entry is. And so you avoid all those duties without even having to worry about it because it never entered the U.S. Now, Troy was talking about anti-dumping and countervailing duty issues, and there's always a lot of those going on. I've worked with a lot of clients around the country who use foreign trade zones, particularly in the anti-dumping situations. To give you a specific example to better understand how a foreign trade zone might work, if you're operating as a foreign trade zone and your product is subject to an anti-dumping situation with CBP and the Commerce Department, you're able to bring in that product that you're going to typically be limited in amount and scope to your facility in the United States. And then when the appropriate times when you're able to release those into the United States, you have all of those materials that you weren't supposed to bring in bulk before because of the order. And then you have it there on site. The reason that's helpful, for instance, there's a Chinese trailer tire manufacturer, and they're subject to anti-dumping because the Chinese have done a very good job in the tire industry in overwhelming the American market. And so the ruling against them limits a certain amount of tires every 6 months. Well, that was hurting not only that company, but their distributors around the country because they were only able to bring in a certain amount. And then when it was gone, they would have to wait, and then they could not ship them into the country until the next order for release. This way, they can stock their warehouses, keep the tires available, and then when they're able to release them into the market, they're there and they don't have to wait 3 to 4 weeks for the shipment. So one way that foreign trade zones can help is in anti-dumping situations. Also, some of you may be familiar with the Uyghur Forced Labor Protection Act. That is a new law in the last couple of years, and it's administered by CBP, and it's basically about supply chain tracing, mainly of textiles and other goods that come from Western China that are made using slave labor from the Uyghur minority group. Now, companies that do business with companies in China, US companies that do business with companies in China, have to prove that forced labor was not used in the production of their goods. The reason a foreign trade zone can help with that is a lot of times shipments will come, and if they arrive and it's not a foreign trade zone, if you can't do the proof, if you haven't done the work and done the supply chain tracing, customs seizes the goods, and then you have a very limited amount of time to deal with it. And if you can't prove it, the goods are either destroyed or sent back to China at your cost. With a foreign trade zone, you can park those goods and you have the time to do the supply chain tracing. If you find that they are indeed corrupted by forced labor, you have options that don't cost you the kind of money that not having a foreign trade zone does. So just something to keep in the back of your mind. The foreign trade zone being outside the commerce of the U.S. gives a lot of benefits other than the obvious of duty deferral, reduction, or elimination. So with that being said, I know there's probably some questions. I saw some questions on the, see if I can get back to that. And then, where's that? There they are.
Yeah, we do have one question so far.
Yeah, transshipments. That's a great question. And Troy, you can probably answer that as well, if you have a take on that.
Yeah, but I'd love to hear yours. I think you deal with logistics more than I do. I also, but before we leave the FTZ discussion, I would love I'd love hearing what you're describing. And I have, with clients, we've talked about that a fair amount in terms of, how those make sense. There's a company that I was, I won't mention who it was, but I worked there for many years, and we, and I Wayne, would love your kind of view on this, but it took us a long time to pull the trigger on getting a foreign trade zone and participating in that program, even though we could see from early on that it would save us money. There's a little bit of investment in the front end, and it just kind of, we always, okay, we'll do it next year, we'll do it next year. We would have saved so much money if we had done it early on. So I've done that was just a kind of an anecdote, an experience that I had. Is that common, or what is, what do you view, do you see other companies kind of dealing with that question, is when the right time to pull the trigger is?
An incredibly common situation. Yes, there is a somewhat significant investment. It depends on what the level of savings are, but I would say in my 18 years of experience doing this, helping companies make that determination with a cost benefit analysis to determine, yes, you would save money if you did this, and this is what it would entail. There is a time frame involved. It's a 6-month process. You've got to do, and I didn't really get into the application and activation part, and I can touch on that. You apply to the U.S. Foreign Trade Zones Board in the Commerce Department, and then that's about a 30-day approval process. Everybody gets approved unless you're doing something that is specifically prohibited to be done in a foreign trade zone, which would be like firearms manufacturing or distilling spirits, that sort of thing. But it's a very limited list. So as far as I can tell, I don't see any businesses in Utah that would be prohibited from operating a foreign trade zone. And then there's the activation process, where you have to go through all the steps and satisfy CBP's requirements that you will have a secure facility that you've determined you want to be your foreign trade zone. Because remember, you're bringing goods into the United States. They haven't yet been entered, so you're the custodian of those goods. So they want you to keep track of them, and they want you to know where they are at all times. So they require you to have what they like to call an inventory control and record keeping system, which we all call the FTZ software. The cost for that varies depending upon what your operations are, whether you're manufacturing or just distributing. So you go through that whole process, And yes, Troy, I can't tell you how many times I've talked to clients over the years. Now, all of them, I would say almost to a man, I have a lot of clients over the years. They all say, boy, I wish we'd have done this sooner because we would have been saving so much money. But a lot of times you get the paralysis through analysis type situation. People are constantly looking for other ways to do it. They may, only have so much bandwidth. They may be putting in a new WMS, whatever it is. But when they eventually come around to it, they're very pleased that they did it. You don't do a foreign trade zone unless you're going to save enough money to not only do better, but to pay off that investment in the foreign trade zone well within that first year. Because that you don't want to do it, obviously, if it takes longer than a year, because that means you're not saving what it costs. So
Mm.
the more you can save, the quicker the payback, obviously. So that's why a lot of times, and right now we've got 2 operating foreign trade zone sites in Utah, Specialized Bicycle and Red Wing Shoes. And both of those companies save a very significant amount of money every year. And we have 10 more in the pipeline at various stages of application and or activation. So I expect by the end of this year, we'll have, including those 2, 10, and then some others that will take a little longer to come online because they're a little more complex in their integration of their software very soon in the first quarter. So that's one thing to answer your question. And the other side of it was part of the reason a lot of people weren't using foreign trade zones in Utah is that for some reason, companies were quoting exorbitant amounts of money to try to help other companies get involved in the foreign trade zone program, which was when I was first contacted by Ben Collender to look at the situation and perhaps help. I was astonished because I do this for a living. That's all I do is foreign trade zones. And I jokingly told Ben, I said, well, if I had a few of those at what they wanted to charge, I'd be retired by now. It was truly exorbitant. So what we did is we put together a program in Utah where we really lowered the barrier to entry. I am providing the services to help and assist people apply for and activate as the foreign trade zone, and WTC Utah is paying me. So
Oh, wow.
it really removes a very significant barrier to entry in this, because all that leaves you with are some other fees and software. So that's why I believe we've had success finally in Utah, and everybody that we talked to who is moving forward had explored the program, but the cost was just ridiculously prohibitive. So that's the other side of the equation. So I expect, and my colleague Anna Wu, who works with me at WTC Utah, we are in the same virtual office every day together. When I'm not there, which is about 1 week a month, we expect another 10 next year. There are a lot of companies still, and we're still reaching out. We've probably spoken with 150 companies in the last year, and basically to qualify them to see if it benefits you. Oh, you don't import? Well, it doesn't help. Do you import? How much are you paying in duties? And there's no magic number, like, oh, if you do $1 million or more, you could save money. If you imported $400,000 a year and you paid a 50% tariff, or if you paid a $200,000 tariff a year and you were exporting everything, you stand to save a lot of money, and it's worth looking at. So we try to talk to every company. We try to learn what they're doing and then overlay the program over their individual situation. And I believe that's the best way to do it. Keeps the information confidential with the client, helps them make an informed decision. And the numbers we give them are pretty accurate because we base it on what they did for the last 12 months. So those numbers are real. Overlay the foreign trade zone program, and then those numbers are real. So it really makes investing in the decision to become a foreign trade zone easy. It's very straightforward. There's no speculation. You know what your savings are going to be. So I would encourage everybody out there that's listening. I hope there's a lot of people that are interested in the program. And Anna and I would be more than happy to get on a call with you, learn what you do, help you understand the foreign trade zone program more. And then if it looks like it might help, we'll be glad to work with you with your numbers and tell you if it's a good fit.
I mean, that's awesome. And I love what you and the World Trade Center are doing to make it easy to just to figure out whether it's a good solution for you. Because like you said in the past, if a company wondered if it might be a good solution, they had to really literally hire someone to help them walk through it and do the
Yeah.
analysis and figure it out. And we've got you. So good.
Thank you. Glad to help.
Mm,
And
mm,
it's been a real adventure. There's
mm,
so much in Utah. I work around the country. I honestly probably spend the majority of my time with Utah because there's so much there.
mm,
Utah seems to be, for some reason, this island of economic opportunity. It's the fastest growing state
mm,
economically, from what I can tell, in the union. And it's growing. And it's a
mm,
great place to be. It's got the quality of life. It's got a great workforce, normal costs for manufacturing and warehousing. So I think the future is very bright for the FTZ program and, of course, for everything else in Utah. Right now, the only thing we're working on is to try to expand the reach of the program to go further south, all the way down to like St. George and all the way north of Logan, because we can't really quite reach them because CBP has some manpower constraints. But we are working on that, and we are able to speak with most of the companies that I mentioned that are in that 60-minute, or excuse me, 60-mile, 90-minute drive time from the CBP office at Salt Lake City Airport. So,
Thanks so much for that, Wayne. I do want to make sure that we answer the transshipment question.
oh
Troy and
yes,
Wayne, can you
sorry.
see that? How may transshipment be defined in upcoming trade
Yeah.
and tariff deals, such as with Vietnam? Wayne and Troy.
Well, that's not really going to change because so transshipment is where, and I'm going to give you my definition of it, and I hope, and whoever asked that question, feel free to chime in and correct me if I'm wrong. I'm thinking when you say transshipment of a Chinese company that has relocated to Vietnam or Thailand, and then they're trying to export to the United States and avoid the tariffs on China. So in those cases, CBP has a nice word for that. They call it platforming. And it depends on how much value add is done in the second country. In other words, if a finished good just goes to Vietnam or Thailand, sits in a warehouse for 6 months and then gets shipped to the US, that's still going to be considered China origin, and they're going to get dinged for that. If it is a product that goes to another country nearby, like Vietnam, and there's a lot of labor value add, material value add, substantial transformation that can be traced to that facility in Vietnam, then you can do the transshipment, excuse me, of the goods through that country without having to say, oh no, this is China origin. So there's a lot of that going on right now. I get a lot of questions. I even got a question from CBP about it last week. So that shows me that they're still struggling to try to determine what the right threshold is for determining country of origin. But country of origin is a very fluid thing with a lot of different factors involved. So I'm sorry that wasn't the black and white answer that I know I like, but transshipment can get kind of complicated. So always the best thing to do, and there's two schools of thought when it comes to logistics and importation of goods. Go ahead and do it, and ask for forgiveness later, or go get a customs ruling. And what I always tell people is just go get a customs ruling. If you're concerned that what you're importing may be subject to additional duties, and you could be doing it now and not paying any extra duties, go ahead and do a customs ruling request. That basically is, you write a letter to CBP. It goes to one of what they call centers of excellence around the country. And these different centers, some handle textiles, some handle automotive and aerospace, and they have auditors and CBP officers who are experts in those areas. And then within 30 days, they will give you a ruling, and they'll say, thank you for writing. We've looked at these HTS codes, and we've looked at where they're coming from, and we see this much value added, et cetera, et cetera. And then they'll tell you what the duty is. And then, as I like to call it, it's your get out of jail free card. Stick it in the file, continue doing what you're doing. If some CBP officer shows up one day and says, you know what, we think you owe a little more duty on this, you go, no, here's my letter. I've had that happen many times. And I find that to be a better way, being transparent on the front end, because so many people make the assumption that, oh, there's so much coming into this country and there's no way they're going to catch it. Well, what they don't realize is in the last several years, CBP uses algorithms. Everything that gets imported into the country, you do an international security filing 2 to 4 weeks ahead of time. And that shipment is already in CBP's system in many instances before that shipment leaves the country of embarkation. So while they're loading that ship, that shipment has already transmitted to CBP. So when that shipment arrives, that algorithm is already looking through all the entries that come into the country, the billions of dollars of goods that come in, almost trillion every year. And so that's how they're finding it these days. So you don't have to rely on personnel. They're relying on AI and computer algorithms. And I've noticed every year they get a little bit better. And then I get a few more phone calls all the time trying to figure out the situation. I said, the best thing to do is, don't just continue to do it and then hope to not get caught and then ask for forgiveness. Go ahead and do a customs ruling. It's free, it's easy, and you'll have something that you can take to the bank if circumstances change.
Wayne, the only thing I'd specifically add to that is I know there was an announcement yesterday, the day before on Vietnam specifically. There's a trade deal that'll have a lower rate than than we expect. I think it's going to be 20% if that all works out. But as part of that, there's some kind of, I haven't studied it. That might be what, I haven't studied it closely, but there'd be an extra penalty if people did try to do what you were just describing, which is kind of do the transshipment through
Right.
Vietnam in an illegal way. There'd be like an extra penalty even beyond normal. And so, I don't know the details on that offhand,
Yeah,
but don't do it, I guess, is the answer.
I'm like you. I haven't done a deep dive on it. I read the Wall Street Journal article about it.
Yeah.
I haven't had a chance to get to it, but basically, I'm fairly certain that it's one of those type deals where, well, first of all, it's a real boon to the Vietnamese economy to do that. They were smart to make a deal early. So everybody's going to locate there in Southeast Asia that can. And it's basically going to be, if you deal with China, Iran, North Korea, Russia, anything through there, they're going to ding you bad. It'll be very expensive. I think it's 50% on top of Vietnam's tariff. So yeah, transshipment. I mean, everybody does it. It's usually legal. Some people do it knowing they're trying to avoid, and that's kind of when you get in trouble. That's why it's better to go to them with a question rather than them finding out, because it's much more punitive in terms of what the assessment is going to be versus if you do a prior disclosure, as we call it. Sometimes you do a prior disclosure, you go and say, hey, we found that this is happening. And a lot of times it's much less severe financially as a penalty rather than them coming to you and you've been doing it for a while and it's obvious that you knew it was wrong. So
there's a long statute of limitations. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, Michelle.
No, you're good. That's such great information. I didn't want to cut you guys off. Thank you so much, Troy and Wayne, for that guidance and expertise and information. We really appreciate it. Real quick before we go, I did want to share a few more details about that event we're holding on Tuesday evening of next week at 5:30. It's Stadler Rail. It's called Global Edge. It is a networking event, but this one is focused on the foreign trade zone and on tariffs. Great opportunity to come connect with other Utah businesses and talk about what they're dealing with. We'll have some great speakers, including Martin Ritter, the CEO of Varix Imaging, or I'm sorry, CEO of Stadler Rail, Kim Honeysett, the Chief Legal Officer at Varix Imaging, and Rayanne Salisbury with Specialized Bicycles. There'll also be great barbecue, drinks, and beer. So really hope that you can join us for that. There should be a link in the chat for you to register. So we hope to see you there, and then we will see you next week at our next iteration of this event. Just so you know, we have planned out these tariff webinars for the remainder of 2025. So plan to be with us every Friday for the next few months. And, we'll see, maybe 2026, things will calm down a little bit. So thanks again for your time. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions, and we hope to see you Tuesday. Have a good day.
thanks. Have a great weekend.